Good afternoon. Welcome to Grand Rounds. It's my pleasure today to introduce Bob Wachter to you, although Bob really doesn't need any introduction. He's in a place where everybody knows his name, and I think he trained half the people in the audience, so he's well known to many of you, or all of us. Bob went to undergrad at Penn and medical school there, graduated magna cum laude in AOA. Then he went to UCSF for residency training, a year at Stanford for RWJ, and then back to UCSF where he's been for his whole career. He's had numerous roles there. Head of the hospitalist group, founding member of the Division of Hospital Medicine, head of the medical service, associate chair, and last year was named chair of medicine at UCSF. Numerous teaching awards, has done so many visiting professors that UCSF really should only pay him a part-time salary. He's going to give us a talk today from his best-selling book from a year or two ago called The Digital Doctor: Hope, Hype, and Harm at the Dawn of Medicine's Computer Age. Bob, pleasure to have you here.
Oh, good, Mike. Thank you, Rick. It's a great pleasure to be here. And yes, I think raise your hand if you trained at UCSF. Pretty good. All right. Feels like we've taken some of our very best people and sent them your way, so we're very proud of that, and I know they've done amazing things here. I'm going to talk about technology, and not just because I live in Silicon Valley, but because I think it is profoundly interesting and profoundly important, and tell you a little bit about my journey and how I got interested in this, and I'll go quickly enough that we have hopefully plenty of time for discussion. So let me get started and tell you a little about my own journey into health IT. I am as digitally savvy as the usual 59-year-old American. I use Uber and I have OpenTable and I love my iPhone, but not more than that. I'm not an informaticist by training or phenotype, but here's why I got interested in this. The first was my iPhone, just seeing how profoundly my life had changed through the use of digital tools. And it just seemed like when I looked at that and I looked at my own healthcare system, either when it was using paper or even after we began to switch to a digital system, it felt like there was this huge gulf. And if we could come up with systems that were as slick as the systems we're used to in the rest of our lives, life would be better. Part of why I got interested in this was patient safety. So I've been working in and studying patient safety for really since the field started 15 or 20 years ago. And you'd see cases like this. Anybody want to tell me what this is a prescription for? Coumadin, of course, except it's not. It's for Avandia. And that turns out to be the wrong dose and hurts someone pretty badly. So you could not help but, if you were interested in patient safety, going to root cause analysis after root cause analysis and sitting there saying, if we just had a computer system, this wouldn't have happened, or information would have moved from place A to place B seamlessly, or we would have known the patient was allergic to that medicine, or whatever it was. It just seemed logical that if we just had better digital technology, that we would make care better and safer. And that's what I thought. And then at UCSF, we first implemented our electronic health record 10 or 15 years ago. It was quite terrible. Switched to Epic, which you have now, which is less terrible, about 4 or 5 years ago. And then 3 years ago, there was a case at UCSF where we had a 16-year-old kid who was admitted for an elective admission, was on a lot of different medicines. One of them was this, Septra. He was supposed to get one of these pills twice a day in a spectacular hospital with amazing people and the best electronic health record that about $500 million could buy. We managed to give him 39 of these pills rather than one. This was in a fully digital platform, electronic computerized order entry, barcoding, robots, everything. We managed to do this, not in spite of the electronic system, but actually because of the electronic system. And as we did the root cause analysis of this case and looked at the number of errors that had to do with the interaction between real people and the technology, my jaw just dropped and dropped and dropped. And I said, wow, something really very interesting has happened here that I didn't expect, which is that the technology is preventing all sorts of errors in the way that I'd hoped, but it's actually creating new ones that I did not anticipate at all. So at the end of that day, I remember the moment hearing this case, and I said, I actually think I need to write something about this. I came home and spoke to my wife, who's a journalist. She writes for the New York Times. And I said, Katie, I think I need to write a book about this. And she said, what a great idea. And she said, to do this right, you're going to have to do this journalistically. And I said, what the hell does that mean? And she says, it means you're going to have to go out and talk to people. And I said, I hate people. And she said, I'm well aware of that, but it's the only way you're going to get it right. So I spent about a year of my life running around the country, talking to doctors and nurses and spending a couple of days at Epic headquarters in Verona, Wisconsin, and IBM Watson headquarters in New York. And I spent a day at Boeing to see how they do cockpit computer design, flew a 777 simulator. It was just an amazingly interesting and rich experience. And I think I came to understand where we are in our pathway from where we were, paper, to digital nirvana, and we clearly are not there yet, and wrote a book about it. By the way, this kid who got a 39-fold overdose of Septra, had a grand mal seizure, became briefly apneic, spent about a week in the ICU, did not die. It just turns out dumb luck that that much Septra does not kill you. And I suspect will never, ever have a urinary tract infection for the rest of his life. So let me tell you a little bit about the book business. I don't know if any of you have written a book, but in the old days, I wrote some books in the old days. You'd go into Barnes & Noble, and there would be your book, and it would be sort of behind 7 other books, and you would take your book out and put it in the front and sort of position it. It was like profoundly stupid, but everybody did that. Now, of course, your book comes out and it's on Amazon. And Amazon gives you a sales ranking, which is the best-selling book in the world is #1. Your book comes out, and it's last on the sales ranking when it comes up, which is about number 9 millionth, which is unbelievably depressing after you spend a year or so writing a book. And your sales ranking changes every hour. Any guesses how often you refresh your screen on Amazon in the first month after your book comes up? Including getting up in the middle of the night sometimes. It's incredibly odd experience. So this happened to me about a month after my book came out. I put in the title, Digital Doctor, and it searches for the name or also that is a keyword. And I was pleased to see my book was the best-selling book that came up with the name or subject heading Digital Doctor. The second best-selling book was Dr. Romance Medical Erotica, The Billionaire Doctor's Erotic and Romantic Hospital Bachelor Short Story. Now, if you look carefully, you will see that this book's customer ratings were every bit as good as mine. And what really got me depressed was when I realized that this book is free. So I don't know if it's still free, but there you go. Let me put the digitization of healthcare in a little bit of context, because it's easy to sort of focus on the computer. And to my mind, the computer and the digital transformation of medicine is very important, but it's only important, or its importance has to be seen in the broader context of the changes and the pressures that we're under in healthcare. These are the medical students at UCSF. Some of you were one of them. They are fantastic, smart, interesting, optimistic. I was talking to them about 2 or 3 years ago, and they just seemed a little too happy. So I decided I was going to try to do a little reality testing with them and sort of make them understand why medicine was changing rapidly, and they needed to understand sort of the profoundness of the changes. And I said to them in my most gravitas-laden voice, I said, you people are entering a career utterly different than the one I entered when I finished school 30 years ago, because you will be under immense, unremitting daily pressure to figure out how to deliver care that is of the highest quality, safe, effective, satisfying for patients at the lowest possible cost. I was really trying to shake him up. One of the students raised his hand. He said, what exactly were you trying to do? And I just thought that was the best question I'd ever heard. I think about that all the time, because as we all struggle with this idea of providing high-value care, what is odd is not that we're being forced by our society and the payers to figure out how to deliver care that's better and safer and more satisfying and less expensive. What is odd is that it's new. What is odd is that this is a new set of pressures that we never had to grapple with before. That's very strange. We haven't figured it out yet. The pressures are growing in kind of fits and starts. But I think it's important to understand the digital transformation of healthcare in the context of, in some ways, a profound change, which is the movement of the pressures on us from volume, just keep the hospital filled, keep the clinics filled, to value, meaning we're going to get paid and judged increasingly on are we delivering care that's safe and high quality and evidence-based and satisfying, and do it at the lowest cost. Here's the second profound change that I see in the organization, structure, and incentives in healthcare, and that is the digitization of the American healthcare system. And I'm not going to get into probably what will ultimately be a third profound change, which is genomics and modern science. Obviously a very big deal, but I would say in day-to-day work, it has not really hit yet, except for certain specialized fields like cancer. But to me, this is the other big one that really does influence us day-to-day. This is the penetration of electronic health records in American hospitals. In 2008, shockingly enough, in 2008, fewer than 1 in 10 U.S. hospitals had an electronic health record. That number is now, 2016 data just came out, that number is about 95% today. So how did that happen? That's an enormous change. That happened because the federal government put $30 billion into digitizing the health system. This is a set of incentive payments that got paid to doctors and hospitals over the 5 years between 2010 and 2015. This was not in Obamacare. This was actually in the stimulus package when the economy imploded in 2008, and they were providing $700 billion to save the economy. Some smart health policy types dove into this money pile and came out with $30 billion to sprinkle into hospitals and doctors' offices to get us to computerize. And it was a brilliantly successful investment. If you think about it, $30 billion succeeded in digitizing a $3 trillion industry. Pretty smart, and I think actually a profound effect. So it is not hyperbolic to say that although some of us had computer systems 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if you think about the bulk of American medicine, sort of the modal hospital or clinic, 5, 7 years ago, the bulk of American medicine, the most information-intensive business I know of, the method of storing and transmitting that information was the piece of paper and the 3-ring binder and the Post-it note and the fax machine. That has changed to now the main mode of storing and transmitting information being the electronic health record. That is a massive transformation that, as you'll see, has not had the profound benefits yet that we expect, but I believe will over time. So to me, if you ask me what are the two big transformational trends in medicine, there are two. One is the pressure to deliver high-value care. The second is the digitization of the healthcare system. And you see here a Venn diagram because I think it's the overlap between those two trends that will lead to the most profound changes. If you ask me today, what is the bigger deal here in my day job running a huge department of medicine? What's the thing that I obsess about coming into work in the morning? There is no question it's the value pressure. It is how do we organize ourselves to deliver better, safer, cheaper, more satisfying care day to day, and by the way, in enterprises like ours, how do we teach people and do research in that environment? That is the dominant set of pressures that we're all feeling. If you ask me 8, 10 years from now, I'm pretty sure that this will have been the bigger deal, that the digitization of the healthcare system will turn out to be the source of more profound changes in the way we think about our work, the way we do our work. Why do I say that? I say that because I can't think of an industry that 15 years after widespread digitization, remember we're only 5 years after widespread digitization now, that 15 years after widespread digitization had not been profoundly turned upside down. If you don't believe that, talk to your friend who used to work at Macy's, talk to your friend who used to be a taxi cab driver, talk to your friend who used to run a hotel but doesn't anymore because of Airbnb, talk to my wife who writes for the New York Times. And if you say, well, we're good, we're the University of Colorado, we can't be disrupted. Well, the New York Times, believe me, that's what they thought. If they had not come up with an effective digital strategy, they would be out of business today, without any doubt. So every industry that I can think of 10, 15, 20 years after widespread digitization, none of the incumbent, sort of unshakably incumbent leaders in that industry were still the leaders. Is healthcare going to get disrupted that way? Probably not quite so much, and we can talk later about why it's not going to happen that fast and not going to be quite so profound. But are we free from the level of disruption that we've seen from other organizations? I can't see any reason why we would be. The world looks at us and say, you healthcare deliver a product that is not particularly high quality or certainly uneven, not particularly satisfying, hurts and kills a whole lot of people, and is bankrupting the country while you're at it. They are not going to accept that, and new digital tools will provide ways of changing the way we think about our work and do our work, I think, in very profound ways. Okay, so we've digitized the healthcare system. Sounds easy. My iPhone's pretty easy. I download an app. I don't read the instructions. I click I accept, and it's all good. So what could go wrong with going digital? That was really why I decided to write a book about this, because I was shocked by how troubling this was, how many unanticipated consequences I was seeing, and I kind of wanted to try to understand why and what the path forward might be to achieve the benefits that, of course, we all hope for. Let me tell you about a few of the things that I learned along the way. So this is Rich Barron. Rich is a dear friend, has the unenviable job now of being the CEO of the American Board of Internal Medicine. I hired him for that job when I was chair of the board. He is an absolutely wonderful, wonderful human being. And prior to becoming CEO of the ABIM, he was a general internist who ran a 4-person practice outside of Philly. And Rich computerized his office in 2004, way before most office practices did. And he did it because he's an early adopter kind of person and likes technology. And I asked him about that experience. And he says, I remember it like it was yesterday. We bought the best small practice EHR we could find. We trained everybody. We thought about our workflow and our work processes. They did a little bit of lean stuff. And he said, and we put it on and we turned it on, and the staff came to work that day and nobody knew how to do their job. I think that's a profound comment. And what it says is when we digitize, as hard as we try to think about the work and the workflow and the people and their jobs and get it right, we almost never do. This is an old problem in technology. It is extraordinarily difficult to understand what's going to happen to your world with technology until you are in the technological world. You can try to anticipate it. I've asked some of the world's experts in computerization of other organizations, did any industry really figure out the profoundness of the changes until they actually were in a digital ecosystem? The answer seems to be no. This is an old problem in technology. Henry Ford was reputed to have said, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. They had absolutely no ability to think about their world with cars until there were cars, and then, oh, now we need gas stations, and now we need rest stops, and now we can build suburbs, and all of the profound changes that cars brought. Nobody anticipated any of that. So the law, one of the first principles here is the law of unanticipated consequences. Digital and technologies in general will change the world that you work in more profoundly than you as a human being are capable of anticipating. This is partly why I think we've gotten this wrong and there have been so many unanticipated consequences. By the way, I should segue and say I have friends who say to me, why are you people in healthcare such Luddites? And I, so late to the technology ball and having struggles with your technology. And I say, Luddites, like, come to radiology, come to, cardiology and look at, the electrophysiology. We love technology, but we have loved it where we could stick it in a corner of the building, have only a few very specialized people interact with it, and bill for it. We're really good at that. What we've never done before is this, which is digitize our entire work and workflow and thereby change everybody's job. Let me tell you about one of the unanticipated consequences. When I was a med student at Penn, there is no question that the central hub of the hospital of the University of Pennsylvania was not in the C-suite. It was not in the fanciest operating room of the CT surgeon or transplant surgeon. It was in the very unglorious, dimly lit chest reading room in the radiology department, where this gentleman, the late Wally Miller, basically held court every day. And I see some geezers of my vintage who are shaking their heads remembering. Every day, every team, medicine, surgery, ICU, specialty teams, would go down to the radiology department, walk into the chest reading room, and there would be Wally on his little chair, And he'd say, what team are you? And you'd say, we're medicine team D. He'd say, okay. He'd hit a little button, and the thing would spin around until your films came up. And by the way, I see young people here. These are called films. And he'd say, I remember as a medicine, he'd say, what do you think that is? And I said, well, this is a 38-year-old woman with lupus who comes in short of breath and a cough and a fever. He said, what do you think? I say, pneumonia. And he'd say, no, that's not pneumonia. Look, that's TB, or that's cancer. As a student, these were terrifying. But as I think back about it, they were profoundly interesting, dynamic. They were the time where the radiologists learned about clinical care because they were hearing what was going on with the patients from us. It was the time where we learned about radiology. It was also the time where we did sense-making, where we sort of stopped running so fast every day and just thought about our patients. Well, radiology, as you well know, went digital about now 15, 16 years ago. PACS came out. The cost of of storage of films grew sky high because remember, it used to be you stored a chest X-ray, PA lateral, 2 films, cost $4 to print a film. Now you had to store the films that came from a CT or an MRI. So now 50 films or 100 films. The cost of storage became impossible. The cost of digital storage plummeted. Those two curves crossed. About 1999, 2000, somebody said, this is not working anymore, and they invented PACS, digital radiology. And within a year, the films left the building, the machine, the alternator left the building. Radiology went, in a very short period of time, from essentially analog to digital. I have gone back and tried to see whether anybody anticipated the changes that might lead to in those radiology rounds that were so beloved. Whether anybody even speculated about how that might change the way we do rounds or even whether we do rounds. I can't find anybody who discussed that, thought about it, presented in a conference, or wrote about it. Within about a month, those rounds ended in most places around the country. Nobody said that they should. Nobody, quote, wanted them to. They just ended. Why? Of course, you didn't have to go to radiology to see your films because the films were images. You could now see them anywhere. You could even, over time, begin to see them at home. I think there was about a month where the radiologists were kind of pleased about that. Like, they're not having all these annoying clinicians get in their way while they're trying to read the films and do their reports. And then they started getting really, really lonely. Like, where are all the people? Where are the frontline clinicians that we used to interact with all the time? And it's actually quite interesting. Radiology now is a very angsty field, in part because of this loss of connection to frontline clinicians. And they're thinking about all sorts of things, including moving the reading rooms out into the middle of the floor and all sorts of things. One of the inventors of digital radiology is this gentleman. His name is Paul Chang. He's a radiologist and informatics expert at the University of Chicago. And Paul Chang's dad, as it turns out, was also a radiologist. And you think if your son invented this huge field in radiology, PACS and digital radiology, you'd think his dad would be really proud of him. His father's nickname for his famous son is the man who ruined radiology. Because nobody anticipated what digital radiology would mean for the actual day-to-day practice of radiology. So what do I take away from this lesson? I see this as a canary in the coal mine because radiology went digital 15 years before the rest of us, so they have seen some of these impacts. And here they are, I think, from my own point of view. First, the digitization of the thing, in this case the film, creates the opportunity for infinite distribution at no incremental cost. In other words, you build it once and you can distribute it infinitely, and you don't have to pay any more to distribute an infinite number of copies of the PACS image to essentially an unlimited number of people. That in Silicon Valley is called scalability. If you say that with some force of conviction, a venture capitalist gives you $1 million to start a company. If you think about it, that's the economic law that underlies Facebook and Google. You build the thing once, and you figure out a way of charging for every time a set of eyeballs looks at it. So that is the way digital works, which is fine. Here's what none of us anticipated: social relationships and communication patterns that depended on gathering around the thing, in this case the film, the one copy of the film, will wither. Sounds smart to say that now. I certainly didn't anticipate it. Didn't even notice it when it was happening. Power relationships mediated by who controls the thing will be renegotiated. What does that mean? In the old days, for me to look at the film, I had to go into Radiology World. I was entering their lair to look at my film. Well, now I don't. So now I begin to ask questions like, do I really have to have a radiologist read every fracture when an orthopedic surgeon has already looked at it? Do I really have to have a radiologist read every ED film when the ED has already looked at it and made decisions based on it? Well, the answer is yeah, sure, if Medicare or United is going to pay for it, but what about if we're an ACO and we've already gotten a fixed amount of money to take care of this patient? So that's not an interesting question when the film lives in radiology world. It becomes a very interesting question when the film is not a film. Another set of questions, of course, is the average U.S. radiologist last year made about $400,000. The average radiologist in India made $40,000. Is the U.S. radiologist 10 times better? Again, not an interesting question when you're talking about a film. A very interesting question when you're talking about an image that is ubiquitous. So this is the sort of thing that you begin to see as you go digital. The reason I thought a lot about radiology and wrote about it was I thought it was interesting, but not sort of disproportionately important. It's still only a small slice of what medicine is about. What is interesting is thinking about this metaphor and extending it now to the medical record. Now, the medical record is a digital thing. What happens? Well, all sorts of things happen. One of them, by the way, is if you think about 20 years ago, patients got the right to own their medical record. It's actually written in HIPAA. Try as a patient to get your medical record from a hospital when it's paper. First of all, you have to find the medical records department. The clerk there is by definition ornery. Sure, we can get you your record. It'll take us a month to photocopy it at 75 cents a page, and your medical record is 1,400 pages. You still want it. What separates a patient now from his or her medical record? A password, right? So you can see now the movement to the record being ubiquitous, viewable, ownable by patients. Something that's beginning to happen. There are 10 million patients in the United States now that have full access to their entire medical record, including all of the physician notes. I don't know if you've gone there yet, but eventually you will, because eventually we'll all be forced to do that. So how does that change the dynamic of the rest of medicine moving outside of radiology? Well, here's one piece of it. This will bring some nostalgia for people like Fred and Patrick and others and Molly who trained at UCSF. This is the residence room down the hall from my office, filled with computers, filled with food. Like every time there's food that's left over and kind of turning green, you bring it in and throw it on the table and it gets eaten in about 5 minutes. It's filled day and night with the residents doing their digital work. As you probably know, there have been studies that show residents now spend half of their time on the computers clicking away. That's fine. It's triable, kind of fun, a little collegial, until you then go up to the ward and it is empty. There are no doctors to be found on the ward anymore. Why? Because they're all in their room doing their digital work. Nurses are still there because they have to be. Some other personnel are there. But all of the work that we try to do to improve collaboration between the docs and the nurses has had a hand grenade thrown in it because the doctors used to be tethered to the floor because that's where the chart was in the nurses' station. In the same way that we had to go to radiology to look at the films, we no longer have to be on the floor to do our digital work. And so the minute we're done, we leave. I certainly didn't anticipate that, and I sort of, as I thought about it, wow, that's kind of shocking. What are we doing? We're taking this room and moving it up next to the floor to try to increase the probability that there will be some of these informal interactions, but a profound change in the nature of the work, the relationships that none of us anticipated. Well, I've talked about frontline clinicians and radiologists. I've talked about doctors and nurses' work being transformed. Let me show you about doctors and patients and the life of physicians. So this is a short video put out by one of the newfangled EHR companies. Let's see if this works.
Honey, look. What? He's playing doctor.
Mm-hmm. How's it going, Doc? Yeah. That's doctor, all right. We better leave him to it.
So yes, the answer has come to this. This is a picture's worth 1,000 words. A 7-year-old girl a few years ago went to see her pediatrician and drew this really charming crayon recollection of her visit to the doctor, sent it to the doctor. The doctor ultimately published it in JAMA. It's pretty wonderful and pretty terrifying. There she is, mom, sister, and there in the corner with his back to the patient is the doctor. I think this is a spectacularly good drawing. There was one thing the girl got wrong, the smile on the doctor's face. Because as you know as well as I do, the physicians are profoundly depressed about this state of affairs, and how much time they're spending typing away, being expensive data entry clerks. Anybody use Scribes here? No, Scribes have not yet made it to Colorado. You are some? Some. So the ER has them. So we're making a big investment in Scribes. The AMA is talking about sort of predictors of physician happiness, and Scribes seems to be the top on the list of predictors. I am responsible for Scribes making it to national attention, I have to say, because, as I said, my wife writes for the New York Times. I came home one day about 3 years ago, and I said, honey, guess what the fastest growing profession in medicine is? And I said, it's young people being hired to be in the room to basically enter the stuff in the computer so the doctor and patient can look each other in the eye. And I said, every other industry computerizes and immediately starts laying people off. Only in healthcare could we figure out a way of computerizing and adding an extra person into the mix. It's really amazing. So she wrote an article about the emergence of Scribes in the Times. That was sort of the first time people began thinking about this. Scribes are an amazing phenomenon and really a metaphor for how wrong we've gotten the computer systems and our work. Perfectly reasonable workaround, but really a profound workaround if you think about the problems that they've created. Here's where I knew things were really off the rails. This is an advertisement I found in 2014 for an emergency medicine job in Arizona. Arizona General Hospital, coming to the Grand Canyon State, is located in this Phoenix suburb. It's a 40,000 square foot boutique general hospital, which sounds pretty good. And here's what their services are. They have an emergency room, which is good if you want an ER doctor. It's nice to have an ER. Radiology suite with the latest gizmos, 2 state-of-the-art operating rooms, outpatient surgery, little tiny place, 16 inpatient rooms. The only part of the ad in bold, clearly their main selling point, was we have no electronic medical record. They're selling to try to get a physician in a modern American hospital by saying that you can still use pen and paper here. So let me spend the last 10, 15 minutes on what I kind of came to understand about why we've gotten this wrong, and hopefully leave you with a sense of optimism that we're at a stage now where I believe we will start getting it right, although there's a lot of work to do, and here are the areas I want to cover very quickly. Here's one area where we got it wrong absolutely profoundly. So this is Ron Heifetz, who teaches at Harvard. He's sort of popularized the notion that there are changes in work that can be characterized as either what are known as technical changes or adaptive changes. Technical changes tend to be reasonably straightforward. We know the path, and people have to follow a set of rules, a cookbook, set of guidelines, and they'll get it right. Adaptive changes, here's what Heifetz writes about adaptive changes. These are problems that require people themselves to change. In adaptive problems, the people are the problem and the people are the solution. And leadership is about mobilizing and engaging them with the problem rather than trying to anesthetize them so you can go off and solve it on your own. So this was a profound mistake that we all made, which was to perceive that the digitization of healthcare was a technical change. It's an honest mistake. It's a technology. We're putting it in. My iPhone downloading an app is a technical change. I don't need to understand deeply how it works. It just makes my life a little bit better. But health IT, electronic health records, the digitization of healthcare is, to me, the mother of all adaptive problems, profoundly changes the workflow, the people, how they do their work. And if you don't deeply engage with them, both within your organization, like this, but also the relationship between us and, let's say, Epic, you will not get it right. So this was strike one. We really got this wrong. And if we're going to get it right, it has to be a much more deep understanding of the nature of adaptive change. Here's another area where I think we've been sort of insufficient. We have not understood where we are in our digital journey. We sort of thought magically, put in this technology and it's all good. Clearly, it's not. And here's the way I've come to think about the stages of health IT. The first is you digitize what used to be a paper record, electronic health records. The second is you connect up all the parts so that the electronic health record connects to the record in the clinic of a physician who's sending patients here, connects to the patient who goes to an ER when they're in a car accident, connects to the patient's Fitbit or their glucometer. All of it connects together. The third is you figure out ways of gleaning meaningful insights from all this data that's now sloshing through your digital tubes. and that, people talk about big data, and that sounds great, but what does that mean? You have the systems and the people to actually take all this data that's now digital and come up with insights about how to organize yourself, how to take care of an individual patient, how to take care of populations of patients. The fourth is you convert these insights into tools or actions that actually improve healthcare value, improve quality, safety, patient experience, provider experience, and or cut costs. That, to me, is the progression and the pathway that we're on. We have digitized the record. We have not yet, for the most part, connected the parts. I think we've done almost nothing in gleaning meaningful insights from the data. I can tell you this with some degree of assuredness because my older son, is in baseball operations, and he's sort of a Moneyball kid working for the Los Angeles Dodgers. And he can tell you that this guy cannot hit a lone outside curveball on Thursday nights when the pitcher is over 6'2" and the wind is out of the northwest. I'm trying to think of the equivalent of that in healthcare. We were just talking this morning about getting data on the length of stay of patients in your hospital. It's not easy to do that. That's like just figuring out, is this batter right-handed or left-handed? That's the stage that we're at in terms of gleaning meaningful insights from the data and making them available to the people that need to make decisions, whether it's people managing things or day-to-day clinical care. And we've done virtually nothing in converting these insights into actions that will improve value. So we are at the absolute beginning of this journey. And the reason I sort of came out of this optimistic is I can't see any way that this journey doesn't get to the end of it. And I think the real question is that a 5-year thing, 10-year, 15, 20-year thing? I think the organizations that figure this out quickly will have a massive advantage over the ones that don't. Why are physicians so profoundly unhappy? You know that they are. Burnout rates have skyrocketed over the last 4 or 5 years. When you ask doctors why they're unhappy, number one reason is their electronic health record. I think some of it is, I didn't sign up to be an expensive data entry clerk. It's clearly that. But I think there are two more profound things that are going on that are worth thinking about. Electronic health records are a unique and powerful enabler of two things that put a squeeze on doctors. One is they are an enabler of central and corporate control. Meaning, if you're on paper, there's no way that anybody can watch what you're doing in real time and influence what you're doing in real time. Now, when you're a computer, I can see in real time how you took care of this patient. And if it's not, quote, evidence-based, and I'm under pressure to deliver evidence-based care, I can see that you're not doing it, and I can even make you do it. I can gray out the bad options, or I can make you, click 37 times to do something that we think is not the right thing to do. Who the we is? I don't know. University of Colorado, Aetna, United, Medicare, Donald Trump. I have no idea who we is. But now there is a mechanism by somebody above the level of physicians to make you do stuff and to watch what you're doing in real time. Never existed before. On the other hand, you also have IT being, as always, the most profound enabler of democratization and questioning of expertise. Patients coming in and they've read it on WebMD and want to know what you think about it. Or they're going off and getting their own care, or they're diagnosing their skin lesion with some app. All of that, the poor physician is stuck in the middle with more central and corporate control from one end, more democratization on the other end. It's a pretty tricky place to live. Here's why I came to be somewhat optimistic about this, because I know I haven't said anything that's remotely optimistic yet. This is an article and a term coined in 1993 by an MIT researcher named Eric Brynjolfsson. He came up with the idea of he called the productivity paradox. It's the productivity paradox of IT. The paradox is that in industry after industry, technology came in. Everybody said, this is going to transform this industry to make it better and cheaper. And 3-5 years went by and nothing happened. And this was not healthcare, because we certainly were not doing technology very much in '93, but this is financial services, travel, manufacturing. Technology's here, and in fact, this was captured nicely by a Nobel Prize-winning economist who said, you can see the computer age everywhere except in the productivity statistics. So I go on the factory floor and I see computers everywhere, but I have not seen the gains in productivity that we expected. Now, as you well know, if you've shopped on Amazon, or take an Uber, what you then begin to see over time are these gains in productivity. On average, they take 10 years after widespread, ubiquitous digitization. I don't think healthcare is 10 years. I think healthcare is 20 for a whole lot of reasons. But it does begin to get better. And the reason it gets better is Bernjofsson and others who've studied this and said, what are the keys to fixing the productivity paradox? There are two. The first is the technology needs to get better. I've got the guy who ran Google search now works for me. He obviously didn't need to work anymore and wanted to fix healthcare. And he goes around and looks at Epic and he said, this was like 1988. This is what we look like. So the technology, clearly, we're on version 1.02, and it needs to get to a very different state. There's no question that's true, and that was true in every industry that fixed the productivity paradox. What was far more interesting, and I think far more relevant to our work, and also our work as educators, is that people needed to reimagine the work. People needed to say, okay, we've digitized the physician's note, but it sort of looks like the note used to look like in paper. It's a flat piece of paper, and it lives under a tab, the same way it used to live under a tab in a chart, and it's called physician's notes. And this is why you need young people around, because a young person comes and said, that's stupid. Haven't you ever seen Wikipedia and collaborative creation of a note? Haven't you ever seen a Facebook wall or a Twitter feed or whatever it is? They say, we need to think about the note in a brand new way. Okay, we don't go to radiology rounds anymore, but it was really important that we had this connection with radiologists. What does that look like in today's world? It may not look like us going to radiology. It may look like a digital and video connection in some ways that we have to invent. That is when you begin to resolve the productivity paradox. And that is why at the end of this, I actually came out of this quite optimistic that we're just in the very earliest stages of this. And at the end of the day, we will actually see real value. So just ending up, what do we need to do? We need to work really hard to get the digital pieces connected. We need to learn to use our data for improvement and build decision support that supports people on the front line to deliver better, safer, less expensive care. We need to build the skills, culture, and governance to reimagine the work. Some of this is deep expertise in informatics and code, but more of it is some of the work you've already done in quality improvement and systems thinking and lean and design thinking and changes in the workflow. You also need to say that when you put in your computer system and did all that training, and all of those training people went away, you need to bring them back again and look at how people are actually doing their work and why the computer systems are not really working for them and how to reimagine the way you're organizing the work and what the systems do. We're in the middle of this very large and very expensive initiative now where we have people going into every one of our practices and spending a month seeing how people are using their electronic tools and educating them about how to use them better, or transforming the tools and the way they work to try to be in sync with their workflow and make it better. And try, if you can, retain your sense of optimism. This is sort of the worst time. We've changed our work, changed our workflow, and not really begun to figure out how to make this all work for us. I really believe this is going to get better. And I believe part of the reason it's going to get better is that I was on Google Health's advisory board 10 years ago. So Google came into healthcare and said, we know how to organize information. We're Google. We'll fix you. And about 2 years later, they took down Google Health. And I remember Eric Schmidt, the CEO at the time, coming and talking to our group. And he said, we've decided to abort. And he said, we've decided that this is just too complicated for us. He said, wow, this is too complicated for Google. This is a problem. I can tell you that Google is back in, IBM's back in, Microsoft is back in, Apple is back in. Why are they back in now? Because they've realized they could not build the electronic health record. They didn't know enough about medicine to do that. But now they don't have to build the electronic health record. All of our data are digital. What they're going to do is take it and begin figuring out how to reimagine the work. They're not going to get it right the first time, maybe the fifth time. But eventually, I think it's the re-entry of that kind of thinking in those companies in our world that are going to lead to really profound changes. So let me end with this story. We have plenty of time for questions and discussions. This story, I just like the story. This is the Choluteca River in Honduras. This is a region of Honduras that gets a lot of hurricanes, terrible weather. And about 25 years ago, the bridge over the Choluteca River was fraying, and they needed to build a new bridge. They called the leading bridge design firm in the world, in Japan, as it turns out, and said, we need you to build this bridge, but it's got to be a very strong bridge because of all the hurricanes. So the company said, okay. They put their best engineers, best people, best technology to it, and they built the Choluteca Bridge. And lo and behold, sort of as they worried and predicted, along came Hurricane Mitch in 1998, tens of millions of dollars of damage, blew down thousands of houses, terrible, terrible hurricane. But the bridge was left standing with barely a nick. And you can imagine the bridge designers sitting in Japan giving each other high fives. about what a great job they did. There was only one little problem, and it was that the river moved. This is the healthcare system. I would contend that this is the University of Colorado. This is the University of California, San Francisco. We have built incredibly robust, powerful, strong bridges over a river that no longer flows underneath our bridges. And so we got to figure this out. If we don't, we will be in terrible trouble. If we do, and we should, we will lead the world in trying to understand how to deliver better, safer, less expensive care. That's where the river is. The river is value. The river is how do we figure out ways of making care better, more satisfying, less expensive, and how do we do research, how do we teach in that environment. And the bridge that we build won't be entirely digital, but it better have an awfully strong digital foundation, or I can't see how we get this right. Thank you so much for your attention, and I look forward to hearing your comments and questions. Thanks very much.
Let's have some questions by our trainees. Corner there. That's not a trainee, but we'll take
Any residents or students with questions first? Dr. Yu.
Thank you so much for coming here. I'm Amy Yu. I'm one of the third-year internal medicine residents.
Nice to meet you.
I'm just curious, what do you think that we can do as a generation of millennials and people who are high consumers of information technology do to help usher in this new age of technology development?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question in a way because, you know, it's sort of, there's kind of the global, what can you do to change epic? The answer is virtually nothing. The question is, what can you do to reimagine the work so that the work changes locally? And the answer, I think, is everything. And I think part of it is pushing your leaders to make sure that you have a voice, that you've built in the structures where you can articulate what it is that the system is not doing and what you know from the way you think about work that the system could do to make it better and safer and less expensive and improve your education and all that. I think that this is one of those that's really an organizational stress test, which is it can't be all bottom up because you don't have the resources at your disposal to make the changes that, that need to be made. On the other hand, if it's all top down, you know, we'll screw it up because we don't really understand what life is like for a resident on the front lines. The days have passed, by the way, where we can just say, well, the residents can waste all the time in the world because they're an inexhaustible supply of minimum wage, amazingly impressive labor. Because you're not an inexhaustible supply anymore, you're an 80-hour-a-week truncated supply. And so the cost of replacing you with, whether it's a nurse practitioner, a PA, or a hospitalist, or whoever it is actually quite high. So you now have a platform to really make the argument that if you are wasting your time or you are providing care that is not as high quality or safe as it should be, that's actually a big problem for the organization. And you are in some ways the eyes and ears, and you're willing and you're happy to engage with the organization to think with them about how you design a system that would work better. You know, that's sort of what you need to be doing, and it's kind of up to the people that work with you, whether it's in the residency world or in the leadership of the health system or the department, to create the structures and make sure there's a culture where your voices individually and collectively are heard. I have to say, for the people that really love this, if I was at your stage of career and I wanted job security, this is where I would be. I think that for the foreseeable future, someone who really understands technology, understands clinical practice, understands improvement and improvement thinking, I think will have almost any job that they want, whether it's for this or other health systems, that really are going to realize that we have to get this work done and we need people who can lead this work. So I think there's a lot of opportunity.
Bob, hi, I'm Michael Kosnet. You may not remember, but I was a medical student at San Francisco UCSF.
I do.
When you were a resident. And,
I do. That's always the preface of something that's very scary. It's like, and you weren't all that good.
and you know, so I'm from that era too, and I remember all the hours we spent. This was great to see that radiology reading room. And I remember all the hours that we used to go to find the film.
Right.
Where's the film and who
Right.
has it? And then find the chart. And then even go down to the lab and find some lab slips at the
Well,
VA.
I wrote about that in my book. I have a scene where we used to go to the VA to go to the shoebox. Do you remember the shoebox at the VA?
Yes.
So outside the clinical lab, they took a carbon copy, that's what we used to use, a carbon copy, and it got filed in the shoebox, sort of roughly in alphabetical order. They weren't all that good at it, so you'd have to spend like an hour. So it's actually quite important. I don't want to romanticize the old days. I mean, they were pretty terrible if you
So
think
we
about
spent
that.
so many hours.
Bob, you better explain what a carbon copy is.
Yeah, exactly.
We
Just look it up on Wikipedia. Go ahead.
we spent so many hours, tracking down the charts,
Right.
tracking down the films, wading through these charts and finding all these things, asking other hospitals to fax stuff over.
Right.
All that. So young people today don't do that.
Yeah.
But where did all the time savings go?
Isn't that
'Cause,
amazing?
if I think about it, man, we would have had so much more time. So what happened?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. In some ways, by virtue of now making available the voluminous record right there digitally, we've now created an obligation to actually go through it. One of the great things about ordering the old chart was you knew it would never show up. So one of the great things about the radiologist saying suggest look at old films was you knew no one could ever find them because they were in the trunk of the orthopedic surgeon, with his golf club. So now it's all there. So you have this obligation to look through this massive amount of data with tools that are unbelievably rudimentary. I mean, just think about that. Until last year, Epic did not have a search function in the EHR. Even today, it's not very good, if you compare it to the tools that we have in the rest of our life. So you can imagine a world, and I don't think you have to imagine this for very long, where the data are all digital and the tools are automatically humming to look for that old film, to biopsy the chart and find you all of the relevant information for this patient who you're worried about heart failure. And you put in heart failure, you start typing heart failure, or you talk to the patient and the computer knows you're talking about heart failure, and it's going and looking through the whole record to find everything that might be relevant to you and giving it to you in the form that you want it. That's the world where this will get better. The world we have now is we've digitized the tool. We have the physicians and others spending an enormous amount of time feeding the thing with absolutely no useful intelligence being given to us back for all that effort. That's why I think this is just the worst time. But I really do believe we're going to get to that place where it actually is better. Then it's an interesting question. What happens with that saved time if that becomes real? If you ask the radiologist, it's not like it gave me more time to think more deeply about the cases. It's just that the assembly line started going faster. So for those of us in medicine, it's a very profound question. On a good day, I say, well, it's going to free up all this silly time I'm spending for data entry and for data retrieval, and I'll have more time for judgment and for connecting with my patient. On a bad day, I say all that's going to happen is the treadmill is going to speed up. I'm not going to have time for that. That's sort of a profound question that we're all going to have to grapple with.
Hi, great talk.
Thank you.
So when I think of the IT system, I think more of how much it's helped research. So I can go in and say, show me patients with a breast lesion of BI-RADS 4 and 5, and from there, I can try and see how we diagnose them and if they actually had cancer. Where do you think the research aspect of it got it wrong?
Well, we didn't think about that in the design stage. If you think about people blame Epic for everything, and I spent a lot of time with them. They're perfectly smart people, and they built a tool that had to fulfill about 37 design specs, the most important being billing, the second being compliance. Clinical care was number 8. Research would have been number 32. And that's not their fault. I mean, if they had built something that didn't solve the billing problem, you wouldn't have bought it, and we wouldn't have either. So they had almost an impossible design problem. The problem is, of course, then the systems were bought by healthcare delivery systems that don't largely do research for a living. Even a system like yours and mine that sort of does, the decision to buy the system was made by the healthcare delivery system, not by the school, the university, the faculty. And so you have this tension now that these systems are being they are the way we will increasingly do clinical research in the future, and we've got to kind of reverse engineer them. I have relatively little faith that Epic will invent that for us. I have far more faith that the Silicon Valley companies of the world or new companies that emerge to do this will take the data out of your pipe, suck it up, and deliver it to you in the way that you need it to be delivered. And you and we are going to have to figure out, where does that investment come from? Who does that? What are these companies? But I think that's the way it's going to happen. I look at my researchers in our department. There are an enormous number of people who now are utterly dependent on the electronic health record for research data. And when you ask them, how do you get your data? They say, well, it's not clear whether I go through this doorway, this doorway, this doorway, but all of them stink. All of them don't get it to me on a timely basis. So we're trying to figure out, do we build that function to get you your data within divisions, within the department? Can centrally that be done? I think these are questions we're all kind of batting around and grappling with. I will reassure you to say that there's no place that I've seen that has figured this out yet.
Over here, C.T. Lin.
There we go. Yeah.
I'm the Chief Medical Information Officer.
All right, go ahead.
For UC Health. And
I'm sorry, what's your...
So my title is CMIO.
Okay,
for
good.
UC Health.
So you're the one who's going to fix this.
The electronic health record is one of my babies.
All right. I didn't say that.
As many of my colleagues will tell you, I am to blame, absolutely. So we do understand that a large part of physician burnout in this country is related to the documentation requirements, whether they're regulatory generated or electronic health record generated. And we've done many of the things that you've also described, and we are rolling these processes out as well. We're hiring scribes, starting in primary care, working on redesigning the way that we take care of patients. We are moving forward. We're the largest, I think, open notes system in the country.
Oh, you are? Okay, good.
1.5 million patients have access to their open notes here. Thirdly, we are moving forward with sprints. So similar to the way that you're doing a month-long in a clinic, we're doing 2-week sprints. We've done 4 of these so far, and we're anticipating rolling this out throughout the healthcare system, where we go in and investigate how physicians use the electronic health record and reimagine the way that they can take care of patients. We welcome participation from House staff and students on our governance committee. We have up to 20 physician informaticists now. This is their part-time job. 0.3, 0.4, 0.5 of their job is thinking about systems to improve physician effectiveness and efficiency.
Yeah.
And I'll make a shout out to my colleague, Dr. Chernick, who did write a JAMA article indicating that although a large fraction of resident time is spent away from the patient, away from the bedside, that if you look back over 40 years of published literature, residents spent an inordinate amount of time away from the bedside hunting down charts, hunting down other things as well. So the work hasn't dramatically changed in fraction, it's just reallocated.
Yeah.
We do still have the productivity issue. We are partnering with former Google engineers, as you are, to try to reimagine healthcare, partnering with teams and so forth. It's no question there's a big climb that we have to make to climb out of the valley of despair that many of our colleagues are in, but I think I'm very hopeful as you are.
Well, that's completely reassuring and not surprising to me, in a very good system that you're working on all these things as we are. And, periodically people come up to me every now and then and say, I read your book, and you're right, we need to pull out the computers and bring back the 3-ring binders. I say, you're psychotic. That's actually not the message. We can't do that, we shouldn't do that, but we need to approach it in a much more mature way. And it's like none of us got this right in the beginning. So sounds like you're building the processes and the governance and the people to think about the work in very new ways. Who knows what this is going to look like? I really do believe that the scribes are a transitional phase, and over the time, we'll be talking to a patient. It will all be picked up by audio. It will be digitized. It will check the right boxes. It will suggest questions. And part of it is it's not Epic's fault nor your fault. The regulatory requirements of what we have to document it becomes increasingly obvious how silly many of them are when you can digitize them and you're forcing the work. I'll tell you one very brief story. My father had a cabbage a month ago, so I was sitting there, a family member, watching this process. Here's a nurse taking his intake. She was maybe the 4th person to take his history. She's taking his intake. The computer's over here. He's over there. Are you short of breath? No. Have you had chest pain? And the answers, by the way, are all wrong because he's hard of hearing. Have you had chest pain? No. I said, Dad, you're in here because you have chest pain and you have a 99% left main. But she gets to question 12 on the list. Have you ever experienced loss in your life? And if so, how did you cope? I'm sitting there, that's like a year of psychotherapy. That's not like question 12 of a, but think about the stupidity of the work that we baked in. And where did that question come from? A regulator, nursing leadership, feeling that that's a good question for professional? Who knows? We've got to take a step back and just ask, like, what are we making our people do? That's not an Epic problem. That's not a CMIO problem. That's sort of an organizational, let's rethink the work in a big way. But thank you for the work you're doing. That sounds really good.
I think it's 1 p.m. So you want to do one more, Dr. Albert? Okay, perfect.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Fernando Diaz del Valle. I lived north of the Choluteca River, so thanks for that picture. It's a good memory. You elaborate on the digital doctor, you elaborate on the workflow and efforts that are being made and things are changing. Could you elaborate a little on where the digital doctor is going now with this world of apps and how that relationship between doctors and patient is changing now that it's, as you put it, the moment you're setting something in an app, you get that information right away. What are the burdens that are going to be expected on doctors, and how's that relationship going to change with the patient?
Yeah, no, it's a really important question. The idea 10 years from now that to go see your doctor for a simple complaint or to manage your chronic illness involves you taking a half day off work to go for a 15-minute visit will seem laughable. I mean, people will be doing sort of like carbon paper, like, really? That's how you did that? That's crazy. Here's where we got it completely wrong. You know, the idea, on the other hand, that the patient will be in their home with apps and sensors, and their Apple Watch will be figuring out their heart rate and their respiratory rate and their stress level, and that gets beamed to their primary care doctor, who will say, oh, how great it is, I'm getting all this new information on my 2,000 patients. Like, that's not a planet that I'm familiar with. So what you have now is, all right, you have an environment where patients actually can collect data on themselves, sensors, wearables, surveys, that some of which will be silly, some of which will be actually important. You have to build now a new layer of how is that all getting monitored. My own feeling is that there will be a layer of what feels like air traffic control. There'll be somebody who works for this health system, or maybe more than one person, whose job it is, and they'll be somewhere between a computer data visualization person and a case manager who is following 100 diabetics out in the community and seeing how they're doing on their sugars, which are being monitored in real time, and calling patients 3, 27, and 93 because it looks like they're having a problem. Maybe the algorithm's already kicked in and suggested things, but the patient's not still doing well, and has a video chat with them. And then for one of those patients, they actually need to see the primary care doc or the endocrinologist. We have to figure out what do those layers look like that create the sort of experience for the patient where they can manage themselves to the degree that it's safe for them to do so at home with our system helping them. I think, you know, this was another adaptive change issue. We just sort of digitized it and then said, all right, and this all goes to the primary care doc. And lo and behold, the primary care docs say, well, how the hell is this going to work? So that's what we all have to do. We got to figure out these processes and workflows. And if you are feeling like, well, we're behind, I can guarantee you, you are not. You're exactly where we all are. We just sort of understanding we got to do this in a very, very new way.
Bob, thanks for your talk and thanks for your optimism. I appreciate you coming.
Thanks so much.